from my experience. So we are going to talk about attitudes, costs, risks, and rewards. Well, I could comment on that vocabulary as well, but I leave it for later. Attitudes. We talk a lot about attitudes and changing attitudes and what to do with that attitudes. And very often we don't think what attitudes are about. So what is it? It's some kind of preconception. It is our kind of characteristic way of reacting to certain triggers. It is something to. It's also do with our nervous system. It's a kind of brain process as well. And since it's a brain process, that's a good news because we can change attitudes, and we can change attitudes by learning. How can attitudes be favorable for inclusion, and what are the kind of attitudes that are critical for advancing inclusive education? One is to do with the values and how we put values into practice. So we have to believe that every child has a right to education. It sounds very trivial, but many teachers don't necessarily share this idea. And it's a hard work to change that kind of attitudes. Another belief that we need to have in our brain so that we can advance inclusive education is that all children can learn. They don't learn in the same way. They don't learn perhaps to the same extent, but they can learn in their ways and maybe different things. And the third element of attitudes that can favor inclusion is that we consider teaching as learning. So if the child doesn't learn, it's not the child's fault. It's my fault if I am not, as a teacher, trying to find ways, different ways of teaching him. So I should be learning every day as a teacher. We have to look at the attitudes of local communities. And very often we have preconceptions of many issues that are strange to us, that we don't know. If we never meet persons with disabilities, we will be afraid. It might be difficult to relate to persons with disabilities. And we have to challenge exclusion. We have to say, no, this is not okay. And again, families and friends are important. They are supporters of children, but also teachers. They can be advocates also for teachers and the schools and administrators. And they are decision makers, at least they should be. And they should be empowered to make decisions for inclusive education as well. If they have no choice to make, and if they are not informed properly about inclusive education, they might make decisions that are not favorable for inclusive education. And this all requires collaboration. It has been mentioned several times, but I really think this is what we have to look at. Risks and rewards, this is quite interesting, but I think all these issues, the risks, bullying, isolation, intolerance in schools, unsafe environments, I think these are related to the whole issue of building and developing inclusive schools and inclusive school culture. So we need, again, effective leadership. We need a vision. We need teacher education to address these issues, inclusive pedagogy, and the enabling environment. So what I can see in the framework is many of the issues, they are not in a neat boxes. They are overlapping, they are mingled, and that's why inclusive education or education sector development anyway is always so messy. There are no simple solutions. And the costs. Inclusive education does cost, but that's education costs. So how can we address the direct cost, disability-related costs and costs for the schools? I don't think that any education system can tackle with all these costs alone. No education system. We have to work together with the social sector. We have to work together with the health. We have to work together with the private companies, different stakeholders, and that's something that we keep on repeating and repeating and repeating, and it is so difficult in practice. And as much as we keep on trying that, I would also say that we just need to continue trying to harness all the resources around. There are a lot of resources, but we don't know about those resources, or we are not using resources in a effective way. I think just from my recent experience in Ethiopia is that I went to a resource center, and there were lots of resources there, but they were in the cupboards and on the bookshelves. And I said, well, why are all these resources here? And I said, well, this is a resource center. And I said, well, why are not these resources being used by teachers and students? Because for me, that's a better solution than having the resources in the resource centers where nobody's using them. So again, we have to look at the community resources. We have to find partnerships, and we have to use a universal design, and we have to try to find ways in really working together and making things happen. So this is a very brief introduction to the topic. Thank you. I managed to keep my time.
I think that's the first time I haven't showed overtime.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. Okay, now we go straight into panels. Yeah. So you all know what to do now, right? So this time, Fiji and Nepal are on the panel in here, right? And Ethiopia and South Africa are on the panel next door. And so if Fiji and Nepal are on the panel in here, could the other two African countries stay in here to start with? Yeah. And Ethiopia and South Africa are in the other room. So the other two Asian Pacific countries, if for the audience, go in there. Okay? Right. That's completely clear, but I'm sure you all understand. So.
can bear with me or will come along with the discussion. Just having seen the presentation from Sai, Ethiopia, in terms of attitude, cost, recent award toward inclusive education. And it seemed like the presentation have shown us some key area under each of the subheading, including attitudes and cost and recent award, so on and so forth. So I think that our colleague from the two countries, Nepal and Fiji, will have that kind of experiences to share with us today, coming not just come through the terminology and word like on the presentation, but the colleague will bring practical, concrete lessons learned experience from the ground to be shared with us today. So I think without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to a colleague from Fiji to start first with this kind of what is the experience you will bring about from the attitude, whatever cause or risk towards inclusive education from Fiji. So the floor is yours now. Thanks.
Where are you, Chandra?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah.
So there is no guiding question.
Well, I think, well, it seemed like you have that problem, right? Toward like kind of attitude, community attitude, teacher attitude, or local authorities and government official, whatever. So how do you overcome or deal with that situations if you have that experience in Fiji?
Okay, I'll start, and then my colleague on the left from the Ministry of Education, Special Ed Inclusive Ed Department can share also her experience. I guess for me, in terms of attitude, I'm going back probably 20, 30 years in accessing education. I was not born with a disability. I became blind in my teens, and I think often we in terms of attitude, I think it has to start with the child, with the learner with disability, himself or herself. And then that I also find when after graduating from Teachers College and even at the Teachers College, just because I have I'm blind, and turning up to like a teacher education setting where the lecturers actually did not know what to do with me when I turned up, but then overcoming the not knowing by talking with them, kind of discovering how the learning can take place, then do the various teaching practical, all that done in regular schools. But when it came to a graduation day, and I got my posting for the Ministry of Education, I got posted to the School for the Blind. So I think for learners with disabilities, that's to me, it's the first battle that needs to be fought, overcome. Your fears, your own anxiety, how you address those as an individual. The second thing is then those of your parents, of those around you, because they could easily be the deciding factor between you going to school and not going to school. Education. So family members, how supportive are they? Then I think of course the classroom when the School for the Blind, when the integrated education started in Fiji, then I was going to schools as a blind person, trying to place children who are blind in a mainstream setting. So then me turning up and talking to head teachers and principals. They said, "What are you doing here? How can a blind children survive in this setting?" So I think these are real, and because it's used to do with what they don't know. And I thought for me, what was probably helping me was that as a blind person myself, and advocating or to teachers, to the school management, that it's okay to have a person who's blind coming to school in just a matter of him or her learning orientation, mobility, knowing the surroundings, and overcoming those fears. So of your parents, of school administrators, of teachers, and then just working. And of course, I started with the person themselves, discussing those that can be done. And I think it's also it's right around the issue of attitude is multifaceted, right? We cannot just put a finger on parents, on communities, but even on those who are providing scholarships. So at one time I was talking to a scholarship provider from government to have this particular student who is blind at the university. They actually didn't know this person was blind until I told them so. She was given a scholarship, and then when the scholarship was time for to start investing, then they said, after they found out that this person is blind, they said they will withdraw the scholarship. I told them, withdraw the scholarship, I'll take you to court. So I think it has to be recognition of these attitudes and the empowering of the process of the system to address those attitudes, and then I guess the enabling things that were around it. So I think that, to me, attitude is huge, but it's not insurmountable. So I'll probably stop there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just adding on to what my colleague had said earlier on, in the context of the Ministry of Education in Fiji in terms of attitude, you know how I mentioned yesterday that we started off with a special education school setup. Therefore, when this inclusive education policy came into effect, we had to work on the attitude at the Ministry of Education level in itself. And this was not something that was easy. It was huge in the fact that we had to create awareness amongst all the different sections of the Ministry of Education. The current structure that we have right now is that the Special and Inclusive Education Unit sits under the primary section, which is almost invisible, so to speak. But then again, with the policy and the awareness, the consultation stages that was brought about in terms of creating awareness at the Ministry of Education level was something that I saw was really positive in terms of bringing about a positive attitude for the people who worked at the Ministry of Education. Similarly, I had to say the same for the teachers. Most of the teachers that are currently working in the special schools are primary trained teachers, and we also have to do a lot of work in terms of awareness raising, in bringing about a change in attitude, so that they understand that this is a different ball game altogether when they come across children with disabilities in the special schools as well as the inclusive schools. I mentioned in the other room that at the moment Fiji Ministry of Education is actually going under a system of reform where we are actually trying to put the right peg in the right hole, meaning that special education trained teachers are to be in the special or inclusive schools, handling children with disabilities in those schools. And also we had looked at the enumeration of these teachers where they are on a different or more or less more salary band than the other primary school teachers. That in a nutshell is what the experience is all about.
So thank you very much for our colleague from Fiji. You know, like kind of we start from, in order to change attitude, the ministry really start from awareness raising at the ministry level, so that as a result, it's brought about the positive attitude change toward inclusive education. I think let's continue to colleague in Nepal, and you can share with in terms of this attitude or risk or whatever that come across along with that, and it's much appreciated for your experience. Thank you.
So I think we had a quick discussion also on the lessons learned from the last panel that we'll give a few examples. Oh, wow, that's a lot of minutes. I didn't even know we had 2 digits in there. That's amazing. So yeah, we're going to give a couple of examples where we kind of allows us to be a bit more specific rather than an overview. So I'll hand over to Ganeshji to start off on the attitudes, and then I think Jayaji will talk more about the cost and Surakshaji about the preventive awareness.
Thank you, Jimmy Ji. Yes, as you said, I'll share something about the attitude. This is really difficult to show the attitudinal things anyway. I will share this thing from my one case. That is the story. It was 12 years back. It was 12 years ago, and I was invited to one seminar. That was the curriculum designer. That was the kind of that was a workshop anyway, and they invited me to share the barriers of matter from the perspective of the inclusive children with disability. But time was so pressure, and I got just 10 minutes what to do. Then I saw one character at that time, and I want to show this again. Okay, just I was here. Then just I got 10 minutes. Nobody was ready to listen me carefully. So at that time, I asked them, okay, you are the curriculum designer. Please develop one curriculum for this character. Right. Okay, this is the somehow children with cerebral palsy, functional limitation. Then the curriculum designer team was divided into 2 parts. Half of them, they were not agree to develop any kind of things. Oh, this is nearly impossible. We can't do this one. And the other more than around 50%, okay, we have to think, but how? And then I asked with them who deny to think about the curriculum for the cerebral palsy. Then, if you cannot do, then who will? Who can? Now, how is it possible? Where they should go? Yeah, that can happen. Then debate was done. That was just I got the 10 minutes, but it the discussion was held nearly 2 hours. Finally, they agreed. Okay, we have to develop. Now the story is now time is changed. Now many things are happening. Positive things we can count here, and the one lady name is Dhamak Kumari. She's the functional limitation. She has functional limitation with cerebral palsy, and now she's honored PhD from one university. And many cases are there. So now we people means from the Ministry of Education, from the Department of Education, for this attitudinal things was taken from the DPO side, because they already famous as a role model, and then they are showing their success story, and the society also believes the fact. So we are using the DPOs especially for this thing, and definitely our mechanism from Ministry of Education to community level. We have our own structure, and all structure, they are responsible for this also. I mean, to change the negative to positive attitude, yeah, towards the disability area and the people with disability. Now, another, we have a very good network with the media also, and the media mobilization also we frequently do. And in Department of Education, one section is there, who is coordinate to mobilize the media, visual and the audio. Yeah, we have, this is very interesting. We have 123 languages in Nepal, and 123 languages there, and we use multilingual to make awareness. Right. Another, we have very good networking, and this attitudinal things definitely we can find nowadays also in many schools, in many society, in many families, and where we got that kind of case, negative attitude, then we try to solve the things. I think one more thing. Can you share?
When we talk about the parenthood, I'll just talk about when, as Galit sir, he has already talked about more on the overall attitude barrier. So for the for parents, they because of the religious and superstitious belief in Nepal, the disability is still the a sin that they have done in the past life or something. So, and if you talk about the parents, they don't have any choice, but they tend to lock the children inside the home, because they need to go to work and all those things. So, and then the belief is or the attitude towards children with disabilities from the parents' perspective is they want to get rid from children with disability. They just wanted to hand over them to some organization who can take care of them. They wanted to get rid of their responsibility if they have children with disability. One thing, and another is they don't want to disclose that they have children with disability. They tend to lock them, or they don't they are not open to society that they have children with disability. So these are the attitude or the belief that parents have. So and then this attitude is difficult to change overnight. So there have been awareness campaign and all those things related to parents and all those things. And in Nepal, we have a strong parents group society and all those things. So we have different type of autism care society, Down syndrome society, and then the parents of people with disabilities. So these are different parents group of with disabilities. They come together, they advocate for the rights of people, and then they themselves are creating awareness and mobilizing and empowering themselves so that they can fight for the right of the children. And in recently, in terms of our we have the school enrollment campaign in April. So in that case also, this parents group, they are the active member to get in the campaign that was organized for the school enrollment campaign for children with disabilities. So the situation is even if we have the attitudinal barrier and all those things, they are still they are the associations of parents and all those things who are overcoming and trying to overcome those barriers in Nepal. Yeah, thank you.
Maybe costing.
How many minutes? One or two? Okay.
Okay, please, no problem.
Okay. Okay, within given 2 minutes.
No,
20? 20? Okay. Okay. Okay, thank you. My colleagues have already shared regarding the attitude-related activities. And Mrs. Karki already shared in enrollment campaign. One of the moment, it might be the model in the world also. When the politician convince in the certain matter, country moves ahead. In Nepal, as our colleague Jimmy Ji told, earthquake gone. We do not expect to come again, And then political problems have been resolved. Now we have very strong elected government. That's why we try to convince the Prime Minister and other ministers. They announced the enrollment campaign, and each of the minister should take care of at least 4 to 5 children, those who are out of school. Then famous actors, journalists, and well-being people in the country took responsibility of at least 2, 3, 4 children. Even one of the comedian, he took responsibility of more than 500 kids. It means they are investing for the school education. Government will also support continuously, but they are taking responsibility. So this year, this is the second attempt. We are sourcing children even from the remote areas. And we have 2 CNN heroes. They are taking care even in the prison, So this is the model type of, enrollment campaign is going on. So certainly within 2 years, we'll have no child behind. So it is one of the wonderful experience. No cost need to be involved, additional cost. All the civil society have been involved. And regarding the other costing related activities, we have costed 5 years plan, but we had 7 years plan. 5 years costed, but it is 7 years plan. That is called School Sector Development Plan. And inclusive education is one of the highlighted area in the plan. So we have costed plan, not project basis, but national plan and national costed plan. So then the cost related with inclusive education is clearly mentioned over there. No one can reduce it. Then prioritization, inclusive education is given one of the priority areas. We have 5 different indicators. Among them, inclusive education has given 20% weightage. So for costing part, we have clear direction. And then we have a special education council added by minister. And this council has authority to approve plan and make budget to propose the Ministry of Finance. So we have very strong, mechanism at federal level and even in the province and local level. This is new experience for Nepal. And certain criteria have been given to the local government and province government. They have sufficient flexibility because Nepal's constitution is the newest one. So it is more inclusive type of, constitution. Then resourcing, we have one new, mechanism, Natural Resource and Physical Commission, and that it has mandate to develop certain criteria to guide the allocation of budget. So it has also considered inclusive education is one of the major criteria for costing. Scholarship we have already shared. Okay. Every child can get a scholarship. Okay. And education accounting system, one of the interesting thing, GPE, UNESCO got the fund from GPE, and UNESCO carried out one of the study. Interesting, finding was there that more than 80% cost is bearing by the parents.
I think thank you so much. Sorry for disturbing. Very good. Like here from Nepal in terms of attitude and costing as well. So it like a lot of information and experience has been shared so far. For example, the attitude need to be done across the board. And at the top, he mentioned about even at the minister level, they also really change from that. And I really so happy to hear the word role model, and a really concrete thing. If you don't have that, especially the politicians who play the role model to take care of this, and then budget allocation come along afterward, it could be a very good things. And also you have a clear costed plan for 5 years, and inclusive education being part or prioritize of the costed plan. So really great moving forward in terms of sustainability and support. But I don't hear in terms of costing and this stuff from our colleague from Fiji. Do you have anything to share with us? So please.
Yeah, again, yeah, I apologize. I think went off on a tangent and we forgot to address the other parts. The cost. Our colleague here did mention yesterday is part of the FEMIS. The cost is built into the desegregation of data when a child with disability is identified and then come back like to her office, and so the student needing financial assistance for procurement of CCTV device, that cost is factored into. The provision is there. Also, the other cost is built in, which is I think in terms of sustainability, the accessibility of buildings. And again, if schools are accommodating children with disabilities in inclusive education setting and need adaptation of the environment for accessibility purpose, that provision too is also there within Fiji. So the linking of data collection and the support services to address the needs of children with disabilities. On the other side, from government, when we talk about stakeholder cross-disability, cross-sectoral, support to the education of children with disabilities. In Fiji, we also have the government provision of the social protection. I think I mentioned this yesterday, started last year for the first time for persons with disabilities. And also the provision of transportation schemes, bus fare schemes. I think in terms of direct and indirect cost, when it comes to the needs of people with disabilities, because they are different. Those with spinal cord injury would require different support services. So I think that costing, I'm happy to share that's coming through the Ministry of Education through and the provision of budgeting, right? So, and I think the other room also shared yesterday when we did an analysis of budgets in Fiji. The Fiji domestic spending on disability is just about the same as it's the spending of overseas ODA, overseas fund on disability in Fiji. So I don't know whether colleague might want to share anything else.
Yeah, just to add on and say that we also have a costed operational plan that we work in within the year, and we try as much as possible that wherever there is a student with disability, either in a special school or a mainstream school, he or she is appropriately supported in terms of funding. Yep.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we have about like 10 minutes also for audience who get like raise question or comment whatsoever. So starting from Rosangela, you have.
I would have so many questions and comments. One thing is that building on the initial presentation, I think that when we talk about cost, is really so important to work with the system more broadly, social protection, and um, transportation system and health and all this stuff, because it's impossible to embed all the costs there. In terms of social norms, we all see in our daily lives what are the problems, but we never look really, as it was mentioned, to the root causes of this. And I insist, I was talking on the first day, that it's so important to use the knowledge that exists today on how to look at a community and understand what are the issues, cultural issues. That is what this communication for development area does. And again, UNICEF has capacity in this area, looking of the culture through knowledge that the community has, through attitudes and to practices. These are three different things, and they relate to the level of the family, to the community, to the teachers, and in each one of the service providers groups. You know that people with disabilities in health, for example, the first barrier that all of them talk about is the attitude of the professionals. So this is all over the place. And it's not only about disability, but disability for sure. So I think that if we now have some techniques, strategies to work with this from a more scientific level, we totally should use it. The C4D, as we call Communication for Development, they have strategies to work with religious leaders, with community-based workers, with with all the different levels of communities. And I just quickly, want to give an example of Montenegro, little country in Europe. They have our best practice on C4D. This was a country where children with disabilities lived in institutions. That's it. So UNICEF started deinstitutionalizing them and putting some in foster care. The first day, a boy, a teenager from the community, reacting to the fact that there was a child with disability that was brought to the community, to a foster family, got into a fight with the kid. And then immediately, everybody in the community said, send them back to institutions. We don't want these kids here. Immediately, right? So UNICEF had to do something, of course. And immediately, UNICEF started addressing this, but in which way? They collected, they had like a survey among parents in the community asking, do you think a child with disability can sit in the same school with your child? Would you agree that your child has a boyfriend or a girlfriend with a disability? Questions like this, and they design a baseline, and then they started with intervention. Most important, they used the voices of people with disabilities themselves in all the campaigns. They put it together, a whole partnership, private sector, government, everybody. And they developed strategies to take children with disabilities and young people with disabilities to the parliament, but not talking on their behalf and not coming with that thing, oh, love, let's hug them. Love is fantastic, but we need rights. And the only way of getting rights is putting this in the voices of people with disabilities themselves. So I think that there is knowledge about how to address the issue, but there's no investment, there's no money, there's no, and I think that this is something that for UNICEF, we should put it in service of any education system that wants to promote inclusion and anything else like this. There are ways of doing this, but let's do it in a systematic way, on a strategic way, in partnership with everybody, because this is a matter of the whole culture of humanity, not only of a country. So we need everybody to address this too.
Okay, thank you, Rosangela. Rolando, please.
Thank you for saying my name correctly, sir. I appreciate it. This is Rolando from UNICEF Kenya. 2 quick points. Philippines, for instance, has been known to utilize the power of young people to create advocacy and awareness raising. And for instance, there was an interesting case in the Philippines where youth without disabilities were taking an issue to the court because a daycare center refused to accept a child with a disability. So I'm wondering, like, how's youth activism in your countries in terms of pushing this agenda forward? And what the last quick point I want to say is, I think this whole idea of attitude, it's quite challenging because, for instance, Fred and I were part of a WhatsApp group in Kenya where we're all experts on disability and inclusive education. People share photos without describing what the photo is all about. And Fred cannot access what the photo is. And this group is experts on inclusion, right? So the challenge now is we talk about big things about inclusion. The question is, how do we practice inclusion in our daily lives? You know, we talk about policies, but providing a photo description of a photo in a WhatsApp, that's a very simple thing, but people don't do it. And we're considering ourselves as advocates for inclusion. So maybe this is a challenge for everyone to think through. Thanks.
One more question or comment? Okay, I see one more hand. Thanks.
Thank you. Michael Kahiti from Kenya. My concern is that this is an area that is very key in the planning for the mainstreaming. But when we come to getting data and information so that we can actually give evidence-based policy decision, we may need to think through then, how exactly do we get this data and this information so that it can be analyzed like any other data, and what kind of proxies and parameters or indicators do we use now to bring this one very well for analysis? Thank you.
Okay. I think Daniel want to say something. Okay.
You know, speaking as a data person, there's times you need data and there's times you don't. You know, data to try to see what the impact of an awareness raising program, I think, is good to see, you know, is it being effective? What ways are being effective? But I think changing attitudes, numbers and statistics, they just don't change attitudes. I have two sons. My older son is autistic, and he was in this program in high school where they trained a bunch of kids, students who had all kinds of different disabilities. And what they were trained to do was very simple: give a little speech about themselves and who they were and what they liked to do, and then give one example of a time a teacher made a difference in their life by making an accommodation for them, right? One example of inclusion in their life. And then they would go around and they would go and talk to teacher groups. And, you know, we could throw all this kind of stuff at the teachers, but a group of 5 kids up there talking about how a teacher did something in their lives that made a huge difference in them. That's what transformed the teachers. A whole bunch of statistics about how children with disabilities can succeed in school, that has its place. But in changing people's minds, that connection of kids with disabilities, and then they also went to the primary schools. And they would do the same thing, and they got extremely explicit, the kind of questions an adult would never ask. The 6, 7, 8-year-olds would ask these teenagers with disabilities the questions about them, and that's what was transformative. And I think when it comes to changing attitudes, it's not data; it's personal connections.
Okay, thank you very much, Asen. I think we have about 3 minutes for our panelists to respond to Rolando comment or question in terms of using the use and then how to address what daily, life in terms of inclusiveness or something. So, a colleague from Nepal, yeah, please, so, Jimmy. Yeah.
I'll maybe start off, but then I'm sure that we add to this. I think one of the comments about making sure that when you talk about, people with disabilities, that you make sure to include people with disabilities in that discussion, I think is well taken. And also the C for D, the community, the communication for development aspect of it, that you can really use. We don't have to reinvent many things. There are proven methods, and I think that's taken on. I think one of the things we wanted to share with that is that, for example, when we have we have 2 meetings a year that we all that the government invites all of us to, the joint review meeting, and now it's called the budget review meeting. But it started making a big difference that ever since I came, at least, that there's always been representatives from the federations and networks that represent children with disabilities and people with disabilities. And it's not just about the topics that are being discussed. It's also, I think, when we talk about changing of attitude, the biggest factor that I've seen of changing attitudes is just to make sure that there's people with disabilities in the room when we talk about disabilities, because it changes the tone we use. It changes the way we talk about it. It also makes us realize that we maybe have been showing a lot of PowerPoints when there are people in the room that might not be able to see them. Like, it's those kind of things that really, I think that is what changes an attitude. And I think, I mean, I like to appreciate the colleagues here who've been make sure that those representatives have always been included in those major meetings where the decisions are made. So I don't know if we want to add anything.
I want to compliment a colleague from Fiji in terms of that. We have 1 minute to go. Okay, just quickly on that, so that we do a wrap up.
Yeah, thank you very much. The points are taken well. I think that's very effective, and as alluded to by my colleague Jimmy here, we need to involve people with disabilities. We do that back in the Ministry of Education, where we take our awareness team to create awareness in the schools. We make sure that there are people with disabilities, teachers with disabilities in the team who actually advocate and who actually share their experiences of what it is like to have a disability and to teach at the same time.
Okay, thank you very much. I think now we come to that. I just like to say very few words here before we close the session, and our panel will move to another room next door. Well, I think it's not just about question and answer. It's about having this very rich discussion and information sharing. So, for example, we have heard about the resource allocation, and the government prioritizes inclusive education in the 5-year costed planning in Nepal. But for example, in many cases, like people really question about that really the budget, the resource allocation, but how that resources flow to school. Because in the end of the day, the school who deliver the services support the children. Like the case in Cambodia, I like to use the case because you know, the disbursement of budget to school sometimes delays, and then the school, you know, don't have sufficient budget for planning. So that's really a problem. It's not just looking for this high level planning processes, but also look into the how much school receive the fund every day or every year, for example. I think in terms of social norm, Rosangela, you touch really key thing in terms of behavior change. And one of the thing, like in Cambodia, we use this scientific thing to address the issue. You know, people have that kind of, you did something wrong in the past life, so that's why you get this. But the scientific research and thing can prove that it's not that kind of thing. So once again, I like to take the opportunity to thank our panels and the audience for that your attention. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sandy, and I'm representing the South African Disability Alliance.
Afternoon, Andre Vivier from UNICEF South Africa.
I'm Ababa from Ethiopia, representing organization working on disability issue.
Hello, I'm Abena from Ethiopia, representing here such a beautiful person with disability in Ethiopia.
Okay. Everybody knows me. I'm Philippe Testoferi. And so I'm going to moderate this session by triggering the discussion with 3 questions. The first one is, how do you deal with problems such as negative attitudes towards children with disabilities? The second is, what approach did you take to make the case for inclusive education in your country? And the third one is, did you consider cross-cutting issues such as gender and ethnicity in the formulation of the approach? So this time we could start with Ethiopia.
Okay, regarding the attitude of the people in my country, there is entrenched negative attitude of people towards disability. So because of this factor, people with disabilities are were and are still excluded from any kind of opportunity, including education. But on the part of the government, even though there is limited effort to change this negative attitude of people towards disability, I know that the Labor and Social Affairs Ministry at federal level is working to change the negative attitude of the people towards disability. But what I know is that DPOs, as one of their responsibility, are actively engaged in educating the local community to develop positive attitude. We have used different approaches, different strategies. Regardless of their problem, media are one of the target areas for DPOs to teach the people about disability issues. So we use media as one of the instruments to create positive attitude within local communities. And the other one is we will organize public gatherings, events, and so on to do the same, activities. The other approach is we will conduct policy dialogue conferences for high-profile governments, officials, because we know that decision makers, particularly in the context of Africa, are very important. We know that big people makes big news. For instance, as I said before, if a dog bites my friend, this will no longer be a big news. But if a dog bites, my prime minister, this will be a big news. That's why we know this policy dialogue will have a very, very important role in creating positive attitude among the policymakers, decision makers, and politicians. By the way, we will try to conduct that kind of events even for the parliamentarians as much as possible, even though it is very difficult in the situation of my country. And we also use community-based organizations led by the public figures in the local communities. We will try our best, to create positive attitude within those public figures, because we know that they have strong influence under their jurisdiction. Regarding the second question, in fact, gender, minorities, and disabilities are considered by my government as cross-cutting issues. The government already developed a 5-year plan, what we call growth and transformation plan. So disability, gender, and minority groups are considered as cross-cutting issues. But the problem is that there is a confusion that the government designed different strategies to address these cross-cutting issues. There is not the tendency by the government to use inclusion as a common strategy to address these cross-cutting issues. And concerning the other question, inclusion education sector inclusion is being implemented by both government and other stakeholders. The government, particularly at the federal level, used the bilateral and multilateral supporters to develop, strategies, implementation instruments, and also to, prepare, resource centers in different schools, and also to make, improvement on the teachers training program, like making, specialty education as a common course. But NGOs who have interest in implementing inclusion in reference to the special educational needs of children with disabilities also are contributing a lot by creating, friendly environment in the schools, by providing, adaptive materials and technologies, and also by helping even local NGOs. International NGOs are financing local NGOs to conduct capacity building programs. That is, providing intensive in-service training for teachers to have pedagogically sound method of teaching of children with disabilities. So these are the main approach and the methods that both government and non-government stakeholders are implementing to address inclusive education. Thank you.
Thank you, Abebe. Abebe, would you like to complement?
Thank you. Just to add few points on the raised issues, like negative altitude. When we talk about negative altitude, in general, it's still a problem for our community to ensure inclusiveness issue, because negative altitude comes very early, not yesterday. So we are trying to stop it, but it will take time. Besides this, just to add on Baba's point, like approaches we are using to stop somewhere negative attitudes of person with disability. We are using a lot of approaches. Specifically, also we are using empowering DPOs by themselves. Because when we talk about DPOs, they have a right to raise their agendas. So in some cases, actually, this is also, we have to be very wise with this issue. When we talk about DPOs, a lot of questions in our mind comes because our community is still learning about the rights of persons in general. So from this point, for instance, I can raise one issue. Like in 2004, there was a theme in a Disability Day in December 3 was nothing about us without us. This theme still have a power in Ethiopia, but it have a power, but still people understand in a different way what is the message. They are thinking still that if the issue is person with disability, they can talk about themselves. No one can involve there. This is the thinking, but it says not like this. If this is the issue of disability, they can include in a discussion. So this is the message what the team says. But people still understand, even decision makers still understand. If this is the case of person with disability, you can leave for DPOs. then they can discuss for their problems. Then how can they solve it? Still, we are fighting like this kind of problems, but still the altitude comes in a different way, and we identified actually few of the ways how altitude influencing the DPO movement and its personal disability movement, but still a lot of things are there from cultural point of view. Is there something maybe I can address the gender issue? In a gender case, in our country, when you talk about gender, generally, gender is not understood in a general community in our country. When you talk about gender, in general community, immediately understand alarmed about the woman. When you say gender, they understand that woman. So this community should understand first what gender means. Then gender inclusiveness in disability will come next. So we are working together with this by teaching the community through using different medias. Actually, in the media also we have a problem. At the very beginning, when we use media, like medias are in a local language, there is a different ways to call like blind people. So if they call in a different way, in a not good way, then people are going to be complain on them. For the next time, this journalist is not working on a disability issue. He says, no, I don't want to work on a disability issue because they are complaining, always complaining, but I am not understand, what can I say? But I did in a positive way, but they are complaining on me, so I can stop here somewhere. So this all are a kind of problem for us to address the inclusiveness issue finally. So finally, when we talk about inclusive education issue, as my brother said yesterday, from finance point of view, money is solution. But most of our country thinks not like this. I learned this in a good way yesterday, because when we talk about inclusive education, all people say is cost, in terms of money, in terms of time. If it is costly, they want to keep it for tomorrow's coming leadership, not today, because it's beyond their capacity. They think like that. Actually, when you go deep, really is it need more money? No. Really is it need more time? No. But people don't want to go like deep. But you have to compare always how much you spend today and you earn tomorrow. They always calculating just spending today, rather than calculating earning tomorrow. So that's a big problem in general in our country. So also decision makers are like other government or an NGO, even in a civil society areas also. If it's in a million, if other country, they want to put it for the tomorrow's leader, because they have another issues, they have another to address. So besides this, the calculation in our country is also people, as we discussed yesterday also, the data problem comes here again to ensure inclusive education, because they think that less than 1% of the total population, if they include or not, they don't care about the total development. So they are worried only the development rather than the rights of persons with disability to inclusiveness issue. So still we are working on it from cultural point of view. Also, the other thing that the inclusiveness issue still is not ensured in our country because of culture. Still there is a culture, because sometimes they are thinking like if they see children with disability because of their father, mother curse, it happened. So if they expose for the general population, it will be a problem for the whole family members, like for sisters, brothers also. So maybe, I don't know how can I conclude, but people are looking for me for 1 hour to continue, but I have to stop here.
Thank you, Abene. So now we would like to hear from South Africa.
Okay, I'm going to be very brief because I know Andre's got a lot of important things to say. I know from that room. In terms of the negative attitudes, I have a slight issue, and in our experience of training teachers with that word attitude, because the minute you talk to me about changing my attitude, I get on the defensive. And we've noticed that in a lot of our teacher training. They understand the principles of inclusion. They understand that our children have the right to be included in education. Where I think the gap is that the teachers don't understand how. And somehow our training programs need to be redesigned so that they have the practical knowledge, rather than just, put visual schedules on the wall, and that should include everybody, but they need to be taught what that actually means and how that helps the teachers. How that helps the children. Maybe we should look at changing that word attitude to maybe perspectives. It doesn't have such a negative connotation to it. And may enable the teachers to self-reflect and know that perhaps changing their perspective as a rather than an attitude adjustment may assist. In terms of our approach to inclusive education, it's so difficult because we don't have our government official here. What I would like to mention is the SABC 360 project. SABC is our national broadcaster who broadcasts our national TV programs, as well as a lot of our radio stations, especially our community radio stations that reach right into the rural areas. And all of those radio stations and TV channels are obligated to have a certain percentage of all their broadcast devoted to disability. And that's been running now for about a year. And we actually do see, I know, especially from Autism South Africa, we're getting a lot more feedback from media now that they are now approaching us because they are obligated to broadcast about disability. So there's a lot more coverage that's reaching our communities. In terms of the culture, slowly but surely, what we're starting to realize is that we need to work with our community's cultures as opposed to against it. We realize that there's a lot of stigma, there's a lot of cultural beliefs exactly the same about the curse. The family is cursed. Generally, what happens is the mom is blamed for bringing this curse into the family. She's then left and now brings up the child as a single mom. But what we're realizing is that by working with those beliefs, and we try and encourage educators to also work with them, yes, go and do your rituals, go, as long as it's not harming the child, go and dig next to the grave or whatever you need to. And at the same time, here's some other strategies. So you're not saying that's nonsense. You're working with it because you're never going to change that cultural belief. It's part of who we are. Our white paper for the rights of persons with disabilities really tries to address those cross-cutting issues like gender, like poverty, like that inequality that still does entrench a lot of our South African communities. So I think that's quite a powerful tool for us. And I'm going to hand over.
Thank you. I will be brief around some of these. Because it feels I've told the story already, but I know you haven't heard it. So that's the biggest challenge in between all my notes. I think to start off with around attitudes or perspectives in dealing with the problems, I think media and communication and how we represent children and people with disabilities overall is important, because often, I'm going to mess this whole system off, because often the attitude is linked to fear of the unknown, not knowing, not understanding, and often not knowing what my own capacity and ability is in relation to that. And I think in other times, it's also the attitude is associated with the cost. And I will get back to that. One of the things that is, for me, my little pet peeve is that when we develop policy, we develop it solid and fine. And then we develop a policy for inclusion. And now we've tried to insert that policy and inclusion into a policy that's already there as an afterthought. And I think the important thing to keep in mind and to do is to make sure that from the start, when policies are developed, like we do with gender and many other aspects, they are included as a principle from the beginning in the policy, because then you won't have in government departments separate line items for general basic education and inclusion. And inclusion has a drop of the bucket, and obviously then costs much more because we now have to integrate it into a system that it was not there from the beginning in terms of infrastructure and all of that. Also, other thing related to cost is a study that was done, which I just look up, Rosangela reminded me on that, is the cost to households in relation to disability. And there is, and one of the findings, so I can share the study with you, and one of the implications, because there's quite a lot of hidden cost and other costs related to disability for the household, and that renders children very vulnerable in terms, one of the aspects is in terms of their access to education. Then just around the approach, I think there was never need for a case to be made for inclusion. When the democratic government started in 1994, there was an openness and a readiness for inclusion. And it was actually by implication in the constitution already. So very much a rights-based approach was followed in terms of that, especially in post-apartheid. But it still remains a challenge. And I think the challenge is what I've just explained, that policies and frameworks and everything for inclusion comes as an afterthought and is not part of the thinking. And I think the last part around this is when we deal with, I think gender issues are addressed in the inclusion policy, but when the gender discussion around policy issues took place, inclusion was never on the agenda. And I think that is part of the problem. It should have been on the agenda then. Because now when government or ever go through the tick sheet of policies, they check is all the constitutional rights there, is gender included, is minorities included, do we look at diversity, do we look at provinces? In that tick sheet, if I can call it that, inclusion is not there. So then the policy goes through parliament, through all the place, and then become, okay, now we have another policy, inclusion, on exactly the same issue, but we now just want to make sure that children with disabilities are included, which is, I think, one of the major challenges that we need to deal with. And I have one last thing that I thought I wanted to say. No, it has been said. Done.
Thank you, Andres. So I think here we have a quite important point that inclusion needs to be embedded in all policies. You do not need to have specific inclusive education policies or specific inclusive policies on every sector. So inclusion must be part of all the policy framework, and this is clearly not the case in South Africa. There was another point which, and I think that also if you are actually having a holistic approach to inclusion in the policy framework, then inclusion will not be only about disability. It's going to be about ethnic, linguistic minorities. It's going to be about gender. It's going to be any other groups which are discriminated and excluded from their rights. So I think there was also a quite interesting point from Ethiopia, which I also noticed in the other group, regarding media and the journalists, which are actually scared to talk about disability because of the various use of names of words in different local language. And I think this is calling really for the importance of using a common language when talking about disability, about inclusion. So now I would like to give the floor to the participants to ask questions. So So Rosangela, yes. Oh no.
Yeah, there's such a confused.
No, please go ahead. Yes. So we had Rosangela, Jane, and yes, the two gentlemen. Yeah.
Thank you. I was just taking note of some points. In the past panel, we were discussing the same issues, and we talked about the importance of communication for development, existing techniques and strategies to analyze the root causes of stigma, discrimination, attitudes, and the importance of having the transformative tool is really giving the voice for people with disabilities to talk about their rights, to go to the parliament, to be in the media and everything. But I was just remembering here in terms of possible approaches, because we need to start moving from identifying the problem to acting upon it. So just coming to mind, first of all, normally when we talk about stigma and discrimination with anybody from the system, they will say, this is parents. Parents are the ones who discriminate and stigmatize. Parents are the guilty ones for not sending their kids to school. Everything we need to build awareness. So you see the system saying, we need to build awareness of parents. You're kidding me, right? Parents are just reproducing what community thinks, the culture, but more than this, they are being threatened by it, and their children are being threatened by it. So if they don't send their children to school, it's because they don't want their children to be, how you say this, attacked by so many ways that they will. They are trying to protect their kids. So I think that this is one thing that we have to start banning, and very, very systematically every time we hear that parents are the ones to be blamed. You know, parents don't even try to go to, if they go to the police to say my daughter was sexually abused in the community, the police will say, this is just a person that's really, this is systemic. So I think that we have to find ways of addressing it in a very effective way. I was thinking in terms of cost quickly, that taking that experience of the greening and accessibility fund in UNICEF, many schools start discussing climate change and have greening initiatives, right, for children in general. Why not, when we talk about greening, we don't associate accessibility to greening? It's a way of bringing a topic related to inclusion that could fit perfectly and be used to raise awareness around disabilities as well. So I think that, for example, I was talking about the media, right? Everything that the media does, or the Ministry of Education, or any government agency does, or development parts, representing community, we normally do this. We put a black person, a white person, a fat, put someone with disability. This is a representation of your community. Every community, you have someone with a disability. So we have to include this in the images, the imaginary, like the concept of our communities. And these are not things that are so difficult to do. So I think that finding different things in different contexts is a way of starting to approach it.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll take another question, Jane. Or yes.
Rolando, just very quickly, just to build on what Rosangela said, but bringing it to teachers, is that I think we also need to understand that teachers are part of a bigger system, and that their attitude towards inclusion is actually a product of a whole systemic problem. So for instance, in the Philippines, teachers are loaded with a lot of administrative work. And you know, they're all burned out. After 6 p.m., they're all burned out. And so these negative attitudes, we have to be very careful at not putting quote unquote blame to teachers, but it's a systemic problem. And to address this is look at the systemic problem rather than looking at individual people as a problem. Thanks.
Thank you, Rolando. Third question.
Thank you. I think I want to talk about parents, because we have observed parents as actually being perpetrators of discrimination in our school system, where a parent will not play his or her parental roles, like paying some token fees or buying uniform for a child because that child has a disability. The perception is that the government should take care of children with disabilities. Maybe this is something that was caused by the way like missionary organizations and charitable institutions were providing support in the area of disability. So there are parents who will not spend money on their children because that's the government's role. But I wanted to talk about teachers, especially their expectations on learner achievements for their children, for children with disabilities. It has also been observed in Kenya that there are teachers who really have very low expectations. And I was just concerned that I don't know how this would translate to, because that observation has been made in special schools, how that's going to be in a situation where we have an inclusive approach to education, whether we will still have teachers who have low expectations of learner achievement in their school, or whether the situation would be different. I just thought maybe one of the panelists might want to talk to that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I will take a last question, Jane, and then I will ask the panel to respond.
Thanks so much for the opportunity, and thanks so much for sharing your perspectives. I was very excited to hear the discourse start to look at gender. My name is Jane Davis. I'm from the Global Partnership for Education, GPE, where I'm the Senior Education Specialist for Gender Equality. And what we've been doing in GPE is working together with UNGAI in a strategic partnership to help our partner countries to develop gender responsive education sector plans. And obviously the theme of this roundtable is disability inclusive education sector planning. So I'm particularly interested in how we can sort of try to perhaps bring these two strands together, because the issues are exactly the same. When we're in our guidance document, we're looking at how gender needs to be rippling through the whole system. It's not just about getting girls into school, but it's about laws and policy, it's about data, it's about management and leadership, it's about finance, and then the supply, and so on. And of course, attitudes, or I would really appreciate actually the idea of talking about perspectives rather than attitudes. I thought that was a very, very helpful perspective because you know, we do see the same defensiveness that can come up when we're talking about gender equality. We can see the same sort of issues. We've got data about, you know, the economic benefits of educating girls, but it's still actually not translating into change at this point. So I'm just thinking about two things in particular, that when we're talking about data, you know, we're talking about children with disabilities, and there's a risk that we might in our minds have a bit of a unisex view, but it is very important that we're thinking, you know, is it the same for boys with disabilities as it is for girls? And what are the specific challenges that girls, particularly adolescent girls, might be facing? Adolescent girls with disabilities in a school setting. Are the issues the same for them? Are we collecting data around that, quantitative and qualitative? So that was one thing. And the second thing is yeah, how can we make sure that the dialogue group looking at disability inclusion is connecting with the dialogue group that's looking at gender responsiveness? And is it possible to perhaps make more explicit in the framework that we need a gender lens going through?
Okay, thank you, Lent. Jane, so I will now ask the panel to answer. So would you like to start?
I want to start with the last comment. And I know it's not your intention, but the question is, the dialogue group on inclusion, why don't it connect with the dialogue group on gender? I want to say, why didn't the dialogue group on gender connect with the dialogue group on inclusion? Because that is the other way around. And I think that is a big part that we sit with when we deal with children with disabilities and inclusion. We need to shout so much louder to be heard, because it's not necessarily on the top of the political agenda. Other aspects and might not be as simple as I put it now, but often gender you need just to whisper loud because it's a political issue. Politicians are generally more sensitive towards that. Also because the gender movement has come a long way and is well represented in the political arena in some areas. And I think that's often part of our problem. Just one other thing, and I think that is the important thing around parents. And I think what Rosangela has raised is very important, because I think we also come from a history where the script that we provided for parents was, if you have a child with a disability and you identify it, we don't think you are able to take care of that child, so we will put that child in another form of care where the child can get specialized attention. And I think that's pretty much come from the missionaries and all of that, and that need to be changed. But part of that is, I thought actually initially I should say I'm going to apologize because I'm repeating myself all over, and then I decided I'm not going to apologize ever about that. That is why I keep on hammering on the point, let's start with the early years. Let's start with ECD. I can cite it, I'm not going to use it here, ample examples where through early learning programs, parents discover their own strengths and that they can take care of their children and that their children have opportunities to learn. The nice thing about that, and there is good case studies around it, those parents become then the advocates to demand for inclusion, to demand that their children get quality services. But we need to start early. 8 is too late. We need to start early because it's not only about them, the child, it's also about the parents and those opportunities. And I just want to conclude with the one part around the importance of images, because I think that's so critical. And I know from at UNICEF South Africa and the program that I work in, no program will be illustrated or photographs taken or anything if it does not include children with disabilities. And that if that becomes the norm, it becomes, and I want to put it in inverted commas, normalized. People associate easier with that, and it doesn't become something strange, something foreign around that. That's all from me, believe it or not.
No? Okay, Abebe.
Okay. Angela, thank you. Really, the parents' issue is very important, particularly about mothers having intellectual disability in the context of Africa. Because they will have sacrifice to their children with intellectual disability, particularly mothers. But we have to be careful that when we say parents, studies confirmed that there are 5 categories of parents of children with disabilities. Some of them are overprotective. The others also conduct open and systematic rejection of their children with disabilities. A few may accept their children with disabilities. But all of them need, awareness. So that's why my organization, prepared a plan for parents with disabilities. First, we have tried to create, awareness within the selected parents of children with disabilities. Then we encourage them, we facilitate them to establish a club or an association of parents of children with disabilities to be advocates of their children with disabilities. So you have raised a very important point that the parents should have, meaningful involvement, even for the success of, inclusive education. It is true. And the other point that Ronaldo raised, Ronaldo from Kenya, not from Portugal. Orlando, okay, sorry. Anyway, regarding teachers, teachers are #1 instrument for the implementation of inclusion. Particularly, DPOs in my country, focus on providing trainings for teachers, particularly for the members of their trade unions. Teachers' trade unions are very important, not only to facilitate the success of inclusive education in the sector, but also to create, proper awareness, positive awareness within the local community. Teachers are very important. By the way, in my country, sometimes the government uses, teachers to conduct, vaccination. In a condition there is no, professionals, medical professionals. Thank you.
Thank you, Abebe. So just before, last question from Jim.
No, it's really just a comment. I was talking to someone previously today, and they said, because the focus is on disabilities now, if we're looking at inclusion policies, does that mean it doesn't have to mention other groups and so on? And I thought, maybe they're seeing me as a kind of UNESCO voice. And so I said, it definitely does not mean that at all. Inclusion is, it encompasses everybody. And for me, one of the best things that I'm ex-UNICEF now, I'm at IIEP now, one of the best things that UNICEF did with UIS was the out-of-school children's study. And that really looked at who is out of school in a particular country and why are they out of school. Now, in some countries, it may well be issues of mother tongue, it may be issues of ethnicity, etc. So really, I think when it comes to national priorities in terms of policy and planning, it should reflect the situation on the ground in that particular country. It's interesting, one of the countries here today in this group, Vietnam, has got one of the, it's got fantastic PISA scores and so on, and yet 70% of children with disabilities of primary school age are out of school. So sometimes maybe we're almost lifting the bar too much and thinking about all the learning and stuff, whereas if you take the bar down a bit and say, well, who's actually in school? And children with disabilities are definitely one of the most marginalized groups.
Thank you, Jim. So, Abene, you have the last word. 2 minutes.
Thank you.
Your minutes are also
Thank
short.
you. I received already 2 minutes.
We'll see what happens.
I think most of things already addressed, but just to add few points on existing techniques that we are trying to ensure inclusive issue is just we are using as an opportunity for government offices that currently they have opened their doors, whatever there is a bureaucracy, but they open their door to discuss with us the issue of disability, however it's costly for them, as I say, but still we use these opportunities and we are trying to convince them still to ensure this. Besides the parent, also still one of the problem in our country is people with disability by themselves is not accepted their disability because of culture and different reasons. Most of people, they are disabled. When you say disabled, they say, no, I'm not disabled. Because it happened because of his parents' curse and something else. So if he accepts this, the community is going to be pushing him from the system. So they don't want to accept. If they accept, once it is a power for DPOs to push government and other development partners to ensure inclusiveness issue. If they have 2, 3 ideas, so it's a problem for us. For instance, in a physically disabled person, some needs wheelchair. Some says, no, I'm not disabled. Some needs crunch. Some says it's not such a big deal For us now, I can use like wooden materials and locally and something. So it's not a big deal in an official meeting. So this is a problem, and we are trying to. Also, we discussed. I don't know. I'm rushing. Also, we discussed in this morning session with our country group that the school teachers issue, infrastructure issue, and also the school materials issue. In this area also we discussed a lot of things. How is teachers should involve this system, and what is the role of teachers to ensure inclusive education issue, and also the infrastructure role we discussed in detail. Maybe specifically from the teacher point of view, teachers from starting from yesterday, teachers in Ethiopia most of the time are not allowed, especially persons with disability are not allowed to become a teacher. If they become a teacher in our country, we hope that they have influenced the other community in the school, and also maybe from the point of barriers still. I don't know. People are looking for me to hear, but I can stop here.
You're gonna, I just bought you a little more time.
Okay, thank you. If this is the case, I think I have a mandate now to stop or to continue 1 hour. Because already I penalized. Just to say on a barriers issue, barriers are a lot, have influencing to ensure the children with disability inclusiveness issue. Because of barriers, children are not happy to come to school. If they come, they are going to be challenging with a different issue. I can tell you one experience from my life in my community, which is I graduated from university by degree level. It means I became a prime minister, right? Because I'm full guy now. But at that, until I graduated, I never know what is computer. If you believe or not, we have a computer class, but it was on a 3rd floor. I never see even. In my community also, if you search the whole my Kabale Warada level, you can find maybe 3-4 computer in a home level, because I'm coming from poor community in a farmer area. So I never know computer. Most of the time, people talking about community computer, and also I'm playing with my colleagues about the computer. I was thinking as such a magic thing. I don't know. And also sometimes we are joking, like if you see computer, if you don't learn, he will kill you. We are talking like this. So this is a very challenge for me. So I was not happy. And every Wednesday afternoon we have a computer class, but I'm not going to school. Because if I go to school, just other guys climbing up, but I'm sitting there down, all are and go and left me in down. So I don't want to see these challenges. Thank you for time being.
Thank you for the panelists.
Very sorry about the time mix-up.
If I could please use a microphone. I just made the same announcement in the other room. So if you look on the agenda, we now have another group work. So that's going to be your second activity in the country team. And you'll be working on demand side this time, supply side in the morning, demand side. Now, how did it go, by the way? How did the group work go? Did you find the instructions okay and you had a good discussion? Good. So you'll just be doing the same, and the instructions will still be in the rooms for the second activity. But there's a little twist. I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice. The last session for the day, we will be making small presentations. So we will be gathering by region, and we're asking every country to make a 5-minute quick presentation on what they've done in activity, group work 1 and 2.